The wind howled like a wounded beast across the Montana plains, rattling the wooden shutters of Elena Mackenzie's cabin with such fury that she feared they might tear clean off their hinges. Snow drove horizontally against the single window, creating patterns that shifted and danced in the amber glow of her oil lamp. She pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders and stirred the pot of stew hanging over the fire, the savory steam rising to mingle with the wood smoke that filled the small space. 3 months had passed since James's funeral. 3 months since the fever took him and left her alone on their homestead 20 miles from the nearest settlement. The townspeople had urged her to sell and move back east, but Elena couldn't abandon the life they'd built together. Every morning she fed their livestock, tended their small garden, and maintained the cabin with the same careful attention James had shown. Tonight, however, the storm seemed determined to test her resolve. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as a tree branch struck the roof. Elena winced and glanced upward, silently praying the structure would hold. The storm had been building since sunset, and by her estimation, it would rage until dawn. She'd seen blizzards before, but this one carried a particular violence that made her bones ache with memory of her grandmother's warnings about nature's fury. As she ladled stew into a bowl, a sound cut through the wind's roar, something that didn't belong to the storm's symphony. Elena froze, straining to hear over the tempest. There it was again, a low moan, distinctly human, coming from somewhere near her front door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Living alone meant every unexpected sound could signal danger. Bandits, claim jumpers, or worse, could be using the storm as cover. But that moan, it carried pain, not menace. Elena set down her bowl and moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. The lantern's light barely penetrated the swirling snow, revealing nothing but white chaos. The sound came again, weaker this time, followed by what sounded like labored breathing. Elena's nursing instincts, honed during James's final illness, overrode her caution. Someone was hurt and dying in this storm. She couldn't live with herself if she turned away. Grabbing her heaviest coat and the lantern, Elena unlatched the door and stepped into the howling wind. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her eyes water instantly. Snow stung her face as she raised the lantern high, its circle of light dancing wildly in the wind. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Where are you?" A dark shape huddled against the side of her cabin caught her attention. Elena approached carefully, lantern extended. As the light fell across the figure, she gasped. A man lay crumpled in the snow, his long black hair matted with ice and blood. His clothing, buckskin leggings and a beaded vest, marked him as Native American, and a crude bandage around his shoulder was soaked crimson. For a moment Elena hesitated. The tensions between settlers and the local tribes ran high, especially after the recent conflicts near Fort Benton. But looking at this wounded man, she saw only someone in desperate need. His breathing was shallow, his lips blue with cold. He wouldn't survive another hour in this storm. "Can you hear me?" Elena knelt beside him, setting the lantern in the snow. The man's eyelids fluttered, and he tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. His skin was cold as marble beneath her touch. Without further hesitation, Elena slipped her arms under his shoulders and legs. He was lean but solid, and it took all her strength to lift him. The wind nearly knocked them both down as she struggled toward the door, but determination born of compassion gave her the power to drag him inside. The warmth of the cabin seemed to revive him slightly. His eyes opened, dark as midnight and filled with confusion. He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement aggravated his shoulder wound. "Easy now," Elena said softly, helping him settle near the fire. "You're safe. Let me look at that shoulder." The man watched her warily as she fetched her medical supplies, clean cloth, whiskey for disinfecting, and needle and thread. His gaze followed her every movement, alert despite his weakened state. When she began cutting away his bloodied vest, he caught her wrist gently but firmly. "Why?" he asked in accented English, his voice rough as gravel. Elena met his eyes steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "Storm or no storm, I won't let someone die on my doorstep." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of an unexpected kindness. He released her wrist and nodded once, settling back to allow her ministrations. As Elena cleaned and stitched his wound by lamplight, with the storm raging outside and the fire crackling between them, she couldn't know that this moment of compassion would change both their lives forever. The warrior's name was Ayana, eternal blossom in his language, and he spoke it with quiet dignity as Elena finished bandaging his shoulder. The bleeding had stopped, and color was slowly returning to his weathered face. He sat propped against her wooden chest, accepting the bowl of stew she offered with a formal nod of gratitude. "Ayana," Elena repeated carefully, testing the unfamiliar syllables. "I'm Elena, Elena Mackenzie." He studied her face in the flickering firelight, as if memorizing each feature. "Elena," he said, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice, softer, more musical. "You are alone here?" The question held no threat, only genuine concern. Elena nodded, stirring her own bowl though her appetite had vanished. "My husband passed 3 months ago. Fever took him." "I am sorry for your loss," Ayana said with solemn formality. "To lose one's partner is to lose half of one's spirit." The simple sincerity of his words touched something deep in Elena's chest. In all the condolences she'd received from neighbors and townspeople, none had captured the truth of her grief so precisely. She looked up to find him watching her with understanding that transcended cultural boundaries. "How did you come to be hurt?" she asked, changing the subject before emotion could overwhelm her. Ayana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Raiders. White men, but not soldiers. They attacked a hunting party 2 days' ride from here. I was separated from my brothers during the fight." Eleanor's blood chilled. She'd heard rumors of rogue bands targeting both settlers and Native Americans, stealing livestock and goods to sell in distant towns. "Are you the only survivor?" "No," Ayana said quickly. "The others escaped, but I stayed behind to delay the raiders' pursuit. A bullet found my shoulder, and I lost much blood before finding shelter." He paused, meeting her gaze directly. "I did not expect to find kindness in a white woman's home." The honesty in his statement stung, though Elena knew it reflected the harsh realities of frontier life. "Not all of us are the same," she said quietly. "Just as I imagine not all of your people are the same." Ayana nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "This is wisdom. My grandmother often said that a person's heart matters more than the color of their skin." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted from wary tension to cautious acceptance. Elena found herself genuinely curious about this man, who spoke with such thoughtfulness despite his pain. "Your English is very good," she observed, refilling his bowl without being asked. "My father traded with the army fort when I was young. He believed understanding your language would help our people navigate the changing world." Ayana's expression grew distant. He was both right and wrong. Elena heard the weight of experience in those words, the hope and disappointment that came with trying to bridge 2 worlds. She thought of James, who had always spoken respectfully of the Native Americans they occasionally encountered during trips to town, unlike many of their neighbors. "Tell me about your grandmother," Elena said, settling back with her own bowl. "She sounds wise." For the first time, Ayana's stern features truly softened. "Nayeli was a healer and storyteller. She taught me that every person carries both light and shadow, and it is our choice which we feed." He gestured toward his bandaged shoulder. "She would have approved of your healing touch." "I learned from my mother back in Ohio," Elena replied. "She always said that mercy was the highest calling, regardless of who needed it." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind's mournful song. Elena found herself stealing glances at her unexpected guest, noting the careful way he moved to avoid aggravating his wound, the respectful manner in which he held himself in her home. "Your people," she ventured carefully. "Do they know where you are?" Ayana nodded. "My brother Takoda leads our hunting party. When the storm breaks, he will search for me. I left signs they would recognize." He studied her face. "Does this worry you?" Elena considered the question honestly. Tomorrow she might face a group of armed warriors at her door, demanding the return of their injured brother. The thought should terrify her, but instead she felt only a strange sense of anticipation. "Should it?" she asked. "No," Ayana said with quiet certainty. "They will see what you have done for me. Honor recognizes honor, regardless of the language it speaks." The wind gusted particularly hard, rattling the entire cabin. Both Elena and Ayana looked toward the window, where snow continued to pile against the glass. "This storm will not break until dawn," Ayana observed. "Perhaps longer." Elena nodded, then rose to fetch more wood for the fire. "Then we'll wait it out together," she said simply, as if housing a wounded warrior through a blizzard was the most natural thing in the world. As she built up the fire, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since James's death, the comfort of companionship. Not romance, or even deep friendship, but the simple, profound connection between two human beings, sharing warmth and safety against the storm's fury. Behind her, Ayana settled back against the chest, his breathing deep and steady. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to truly rest, trusting in the kindness of a stranger who had chosen compassion over fear. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing a world transformed by the storm's fury. Snow had drifted nearly to the windowsill, and icicles hung like crystal daggers from the eaves. Inside, the fire had burned low to glowing embers, and Elena stirred from her makeshift bed on the floor near the hearth. She had insisted Ayana take her bed, overruling his protests with gentle firmness. Now she found him already awake, sitting up carefully and testing the movement of his injured shoulder. The fever that had gripped him during the night had broken, leaving his eyes clear and alert. "How do you feel?" Elena asked, rising to stir the fire back to life. "Stronger," Ayana replied, though she noticed the slight wince as he shifted position. "Your care has been unexpected." Elena smiled as she added wood to the fire. "Good unexpected, I hope." "Very good," he assured her, then grew serious. "Elena, when my people come, and they will come, you must not fear them. I will tell them of your kindness, but first impressions matter greatly among my tribe." Before Elena could respond, a new sound reached their ears through the cabin's walls. The distant call of a hawk, repeated 3 times in precise intervals. Ayana's head snapped up, and relief flooded his features. "Takoda," he breathed. "My brother has found me." Elena's heart began to race, though whether from fear or anticipation she couldn't say. "What should I do?" "Be yourself," Ayana said simply. "Show them the same kindness you showed me, and all will be well." The hawk call came again, closer this time, followed by the soft whinny of horses picking their way through the deep snow. Elena moved to the window and peered out through the frost-covered glass. 5 riders approached through the white landscape, their horses' breath creating clouds in the crisp morning air. The lead rider was clearly Ayana's brother. They shared the same strong jaw and dignified bearing, though Takoda's face was marked by worry lines that deepened as he scanned the cabin. Behind him rode 3 other warriors, and to Elena's surprise, an elderly woman wrapped in a beautifully beaded blanket. "Your grandmother?" Elena asked, turning from the window. "No," Ayana replied, struggling to his feet despite Elena's protests. "That is Nayeli's sister, Ista. She is our medicine woman and—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Our keeper of traditions. Her presence is a great honor." Elena helped Ayana to the door, her hands trembling slightly as she unlatched it. The cold morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of snow and pine. Takoda had dismounted and stood 20 feet from the cabin, his hand resting on his weapon but not drawing it. "Brother," he called in accented English, his voice carefully controlled. "Are you harmed?" "I live, thanks to this woman's medicine," Ayana replied, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Elena Mackenzie has given me shelter and healing. She asks for nothing in return." Takoda's dark eyes shifted to Elena, studying her with the same intensity she'd seen in Ayana. She forced herself to stand straight, meeting his gaze without flinching. After a long moment he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than threat. The elderly woman, Ista, slid gracefully from her horse despite her apparent age. She approached with measured steps, her weathered hands carrying a leather pouch. When she reached the cabin's threshold, she spoke rapidly in her native tongue to Ayana, who responded with equal fluency. "She asks if you treated my wounds with your own hands," Ayana translated, "and if you gave me food and warmth through the storm." "I did," Elena replied, wondering if this was somehow inappropriate in their culture. Ista nodded approvingly and reached into her pouch, withdrawing something that made Elena's breath catch. It was a small clay lamp, beautifully crafted and painted with intricate designs in deep blues and earth tones. The old woman placed it carefully in Elena's hands, speaking in soft, melodic tones. "She says this lamp carries the blessing of our people," Ayana translated, his voice thick with emotion. "It is made from clay gathered at the sacred springs, and it will burn with sweet smoke to bring peace to your home." Tears pricked Elena's eyes as she accepted the gift. "It's beautiful. Please tell her I'm honored." But Ista wasn't finished. She gestured to the other riders, who had been unloading items from their packs. One by one they approached the cabin, each carrying clay lamps of different sizes and designs. Some were small enough to fit in Elena's palm, others large enough to illuminate an entire room. Each was unique, painted with symbols and patterns that spoke of skilled hands and deep tradition. "This is unprecedented," Ayana murmured as the gifts accumulated in Elena's arms. "These lamps are made only for sacred ceremonies and honored guests. Ista is declaring you a friend of our people." Takoda stepped forward last, carrying the largest lamp of all. Unlike the others, this one was adorned with small feathers and polished stones. He placed it carefully atop the growing collection and spoke directly to Elena in halting but clear English. "You save my brother's life," he said formally. "You show honor to our blood. We do not forget such kindness." He paused, glancing at Ayana. "If you ever need help, light this lamp at sunset. Someone will see and come." Elena looked down at the beautiful lamps filling her arms, then back at the faces of these people who had traveled through snow and cold to honor her simple act of compassion. The gesture overwhelmed her, not just the gifts themselves, but what they represented. "Thank you," she whispered, then louder. "Thank you all. I don't know what to say." Ista stepped forward once more and placed her weathered hand gently on Elena's cheek, speaking in a voice full of warmth. Ayana translated with a smile. "She says that kindness needs no words. It speaks in the language of the heart, which all people understand." As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink, Elena stood in her doorway, surrounded by clay lamps and the quiet dignity of people who had chosen to honor rather than mistrust. The storm had passed, leaving behind not destruction, but an unexpected bridge between two worlds. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and Elena found herself lighting one of the smaller clay lamps each evening, filling her cabin with the sweet, cedar-scented smoke that Ista had promised. The lamps had become more than decorative objects. They were reminders of an unexpected friendship that had blossomed from a single act of compassion. Ayana had recovered quickly under his people's care, but he returned to Elena's cabin 3 days after his rescue, bringing fresh venison and offering to repair her storm-damaged roof. Their conversations had grown easier, ranging from practical matters of frontier survival to deeper discussions about their different ways of understanding the world. "In my culture," Ayana explained, as he hammered new shingles into place, "we believe that saving a life creates a bond stronger than blood. You are now part of my spiritual family, whether you understand this or not." Elena handed him another shingle from her position on the ladder. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means that your troubles become our troubles. Your joys become our joys," he replied, pausing in his work to meet her eyes. "It means you are never truly alone again." The thought both comforted and unsettled Elena. She had grown accustomed to solitude, to making decisions without consulting anyone. Yet the isolation had also been a burden she hadn't fully recognized until it began to lift. Their growing friendship hadn't gone unnoticed by the wider community. When Elena rode into Clearwater Ridge for supplies the following Saturday, she felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, cornered her outside the general store with barely concealed disapproval. "Eleanor, dear, people are talking," she said, adjusting her wire-rimmed spectacles. "They say you've been entertaining one of them savages at your place." Eleanor's jaw tightened at the slur, but she kept her voice level. "I helped an injured man during the storm, Margaret. Nothing more, nothing less. But the risk, child, what if his people had come for revenge? What if they'd thought you were holding him prisoner?" Mrs. Henderson's voice rose with each word. "James wouldn't have wanted you taking such chances." "James would have done exactly what I did," Eleanor replied firmly. "He believed in treating all people with dignity." The older woman huffed disapprovingly. "Well, just remember that charity has its limits. You can't trust their kind. They're not civilized like us." Elena bit back her sharp retort, remembering Ayana's quiet dignity, Ista's gentle wisdom, and Takoda's formal respect. Instead, she simply nodded curtly and escaped into the store, where she found the proprietor, Mr. Walsh, counting out her change with unusual precision. "Heard you had some excitement during the storm," he said, without looking up from the coins. "Some?" Elena replied carefully. "Well, just be careful, Mrs. Mackenzie. These are dangerous times, what with all the raids and such. A woman alone can't be too cautious." His tone was neutral, but Elena detected an underlying warning. The ride home felt longer than usual, Mrs. Henderson's words echoing in Elena's mind. She understood the fear that drove such attitudes. Frontier life was harsh and uncertain, and people often viewed anyone different as a potential threat. But she also recognized the willful ignorance behind such prejudice. As her cabin came into view, Eleanor saw smoke rising from her chimney and horses tethered nearby. Her heart quickened until she recognized Ayana's distinctive paint horse among them. She found him inside with Takoda and a young warrior she hadn't met before, all three men rising respectfully as she entered. "Elena," Ayana greeted her warmly, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. We brought news." "Of course not," she replied, though she noticed the serious expressions on all three faces. "What's happened?" Takoda spoke first, his English more confident than during their first meeting. "The raiders who attacked our hunting party, they have struck again. To a homestead 30 miles south, family named Morrison." Elena's blood chilled. She knew the Morrisons by reputation, a young couple with strong opinions about Native Americans, most of them unfavorable. Are they all right?" "The man lives, but barely," the younger warrior said, speaking for the first time. "The woman and their 2 hands were killed. The raiders took their horses and cattle." Elena sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the tragedy. How terrible. "Poor Sarah Morrison. There is more," Ayana said gently. "The surviving man claims he saw tribal markings on some of the attackers. He is telling everyone in Clearwater Ridge that our people were responsible." The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. "But you said they were white raiders." "They were," Takoda confirmed grimly, "but some wear our symbols to confuse witnesses, to turn settler against tribe. It is an old trick, and it works well." Elena looked between the three men, understanding dawning. "The townspeople will want revenge against your tribe." "Yes," Ayana nodded. "Already, some are calling for a military response. Others speak of forming a militia." He paused, studying her face carefully. "This puts you in a difficult position, Elena. Your friendship with us may bring you trouble." Elena rose and moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful landscape where she and James had built their dreams. The thought of abandoning this newfound connection, these people who had honored her with such beautiful gifts, felt like betraying something essential about herself. "What will you do?" she asked, turning back to face them. "We will send a delegation to the army fort," Takoda replied. "We will offer to help track the real raiders to prove our innocence, but—" He shrugged eloquently. "Truth is not always stronger than fear." Elena made her decision in that moment, though she knew it might cost her the acceptance of her own community. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The three men exchanged glances, and Elena saw surprise mixed with respect in their expressions. Ayana stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your friendship is already more help than you know," he said quietly. "But if you are willing, there is something. The Army Commander Colonel Brennan knew your husband from their service days. A word from you might carry weight that ours cannot." Elena nodded without hesitation. "Then we'll go to the fort together. Tomorrow." As the sun set that evening, and Elena lit her evening lamp, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that stormy night. She had gained friends, but likely lost the easy acceptance of her neighbors. She had found purpose, but also placed herself in potential danger. Yet as the sweet smoke rose toward the rafters, and the lamp's gentle glow warmed her cabin, Elena felt more alive than she had since James's death. Sometimes, she realized, the most important bridges were built not with plans and preparation, but with simple acts of courage and faith. Fort McLeod stood like a weathered sentinel against the Montana sky, its wooden palisades and guard towers a stark reminder of the tensions that defined frontier life. Elena rode beside Ayana and Takoda through the main gate, acutely aware of the suspicious stares from soldiers and civilians alike. Colonel Brennan had agreed to the meeting, but his telegram had been terse and formal. The colonel's office was spartanly furnished, dominated by a large desk covered with maps and reports. Brennan himself was a lean, graying man whose weathered face spoke of decades on the frontier. He rose as Elena entered, his expression softening with recognition. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he said warmly, clasping her hand. "My deepest condolences about James. He was a good man and a fine soldier." "Thank you, Colonel. That means a great deal." Elena gestured to her companions. "I believe you know why we're here." Brennan's expression grew guarded as he acknowledged Diana and Takoda with curt nods. "I know about the Morrison attack, if that's what you mean. Tragic business." "Colonel, these men's tribe had nothing to do with that raid," Elena said without preamble. "I was hoping you might listen to what they have to say." Brennan settled behind his desk, his fingers steepled. "Mrs. Mackenzie, with all due respect to your late husband's memory, you may not fully understand the complexities of the situation. Morrison was very specific about what he saw." Takoda stepped forward, his bearing formal and respectful. "Colonel Brennan, my brother and I have tracked these raiders for many days. We have found their camp. their trail, evidence of their true nature. Will you hear our words? Morrison described tribal paint and feathers, Brennan replied coldly. He was quite clear about the attacker's identity. A man in great pain and fear sees what he expects to see, Ayana interjected quietly. These raiders use our symbols to hide their true faces. It is not the first time this has happened. Elena watched the colonel's face, seeing the skepticism there. She knew she was taking a considerable risk with her next words, but the truth demanded courage. Colonel, I've gotten to know these people over the past weeks. I've seen their honor, their respect for life. Does it make sense that warriors who brought me clay lamps as gifts would then butcher innocent settlers? Brennan's eyebrows rose. Clay lamps? Elena briefly recounted the story of the storm, Ayana's rescue and the ceremony that followed. As she spoke, she saw something shift in the colonel's expression. Not complete belief, but a crack in his certainty. You have physical evidence of these raiders? Brennan asked Takoda. From his pack, Takoda withdrew several items. A broken knife handle with crude fake tribal markings, scraps of cloth that clearly came from white men's clothing, and most damning of all, a military button that had been poorly disguised with paint. We found these at their camp. 2 days' ride north, Takoda explained. The fire ashes tell us they stayed there 3 nights. The horse tracks show 8 riders, all shod with iron shoes. Our people do not shoe their horses in this way. Brennan examined the evidence carefully, his frown deepening. This button? It's from a cavalry uniform, but old style, pre-war. Deserters, perhaps, Ayana suggested. Or discharged soldiers turned to raiding. They know enough of military tactics to plan their attacks well. The colonel was quiet for several minutes, studying the items spread across his desk. Finally, he looked up at Elena. Mrs. Mackenzie, you're putting yourself in a very difficult position. The townspeople are calling for blood, and they won't appreciate you taking the side of, well, the enemy. They are not the enemy, Elena said firmly. They're people who chose to honor kindness with kindness. If we can't tell the difference between that and real threats, then we're the ones who've lost our way. Brennan's stern expression cracked slightly, and Elena saw a hint of the younger man who had once served alongside her husband. James always said you had more backbone than most men he knew. Will you investigate their claims? Elena pressed. The colonel nodded slowly. I'll send a patrol to this camp you've described. If the evidence supports your story, he paused, meeting Takoda's eyes directly. I'll make sure the truth gets back to Clearwater Ridge. And if the townspeople don't want to hear the truth, Elena asked. Then that's their choice, Brennan replied. But they'll hear it from me personally. As they prepared to leave the fort, Ayana pulled Elena aside. What you have done today required great courage. Your words carried weight that ours could not. We're friends, Elena said simply. Friends stand up for each other. Yes, Ayana smiled, they do. But Elena, you must understand this may change how your people see you. The path of understanding is often a lonely one. Elena looked back toward the town of Clearwater Ridge, visible in the distance. She thought of Mrs. Henderson's disapproving words, of Mr. Walsh's veiled warnings, of the comfortable acceptance she might be leaving behind. Maybe, she said finally. But loneliness isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person. Losing your principles is worse. 3 days later, Colonel Brennan's patrol returned with confirmation of everything Takoda and Ayana had claimed. The real raiders, a gang of 8 former soldiers led by a cashiered cavalry officer, were tracked down and arrested 50 miles north of the territory. Physical evidence at their camp included stolen goods from 3 separate raids, none of which had involved Native Americans. The news spread through Clearwater Ridge like wildfire, dividing the community between those who graciously accepted the truth and those who remained stubbornly suspicious. Elena found herself occupying an unusual position, respected by some for her courage in seeking justice, viewed with suspicion by others for her unnatural friendships. But on quiet evenings, as she lit her clay lamps and watched their gentle smoke rise toward the rafters, Elena felt a peace she hadn't known since James's death. Through her cabin windows, she could see other lights flickering in the distance, signal fires from Ayana's people, letting her know she was not forgotten. The bridge between their worlds might be narrow and fragile, built by individual acts of courage and compassion rather than grand gestures or treaties. But it was real, and it was strong enough to bear the weight of genuine friendship. As autumn painted the Montana landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Elena often thought about that stormy night when she'd chosen kindness over fear. She had lit a lantern for a wounded stranger, and in return had received not just clay lamps, but something far more precious: the knowledge that even in the darkest times, human decency could build bridges across any divide. The lamps continued to burn each evening, their light a testament to the truth that kindness, once given freely, creates bonds that neither prejudice nor fear can easily break.